Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Very excited to have my next guest on the show. She is a published author, speaker, and retired chief of police from Aurora, Illinois. I was just out in Illinois, Chief. I was just telling you. And Kristen Ziman is on the show. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you being here. Now, for those of you or those people out there, Chief, I'm going to call you Chief if that's okay.
Like I said, labels are for soup, but you know what?
No, I'm just kidding, Kristen. How did you get into law enforcement? You had a very good career. How did you get into it?
Yeah, I had a great career. So my father before me was a police officer, as a lot of times tends to be the case in the legacies. And so I'm born and raised in Aurora, Illinois, which for those millions of listeners who don't know where that is, it's 35 miles due west of Chicago. So we are the second largest city in the state of Illinois, second only to Chicago. And so about 310 police officers. And growing up, I saw my dad do the things that first responders do.
Yeah.
I can remember being 10 years old and my dad telling me, don't move. He's off duty. I'm in the back of the station wagon. Don't move. Okay. And he runs out of the car and he goes to the side of the road and he starts pulling people out of a crash that just occurred. Wow. And I'm watching through the window, right? And I'm noting that all the other cars are whizzing by. And I'm like, wow, that's crazy. And then I knew the drill. A couple of years later, I'm 12. I'm sitting in the back and my dad says, don't move. And he wrestles the keys from a drunk driver who had just smashed into a toll booth. And
wow.
That was the moment, though. That was the moment where I thought, okay, this is nuts. This is what cops do. And my dad's like not even on duty, right? So this is what he does off duty. And it was in that moment, 12 years old, I solidified that I want to be a first responder. I want to be a cop. And so that's what I set out to do. I never wavered.
You never wavered from that.
Never wavered.
Now, what did your dad, I'm sure, I mean, I'm assuming he supported you and family members supported you to get into the field.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I was blessed. I'm an only child, born to a cop Marine, and wow. he wanted a boy so bad. And so he got me instead. But he raised me in a way that was like the confidence instilled in me was, you can do this job. And he was so full of pride when I finally, made it and became a police officer at the tender age of 21. But, what's so interesting is that I grew up in my police department. So I graduated from high school in June of 1991, and I started at the police department as an intern in July of 1991, 17 years old. And wow. Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. So I've never lived anywhere else until now. And I've never worked anywhere else until, but for the Aurora Police Department.
Wow. And that's a good size agency. I mean, a lot of people, I know, Kristen, but most departments are not very big in the country. Yeah. I mean, so 300 plus sworn, that's a pretty good sized police department.
That's why I wanted to stay there. I looked over to my neighbor of Chicago and it was too big. And this is a little disparaging, but I remember every time I would go to Chicago, I would see like squad cars with like hubcaps off of them. And I was like, oh, those squad cars look like shit. And so I just remember thinking like, okay, you know what? And Aurora is like big enough where we had enough to do, a lot of action.
Oh, and you probably got bleed over from Chicago too, right? I mean, yeah.
Absolutely. So it's like, I always wanted to be a cop in my hometown. So that was, that's got its pros and cons.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you navigated your way up and you ended up being the person in charge, the chief of police. Now, was it difficult from being a female in the highest echelons of a department?
Sure.
Did you encounter challenges or resistance to that? Or because I imagine you had your supporters and then you had people that were like, what.
Yes, I call them. So we have in our careers, and I'm sure you can attest to this as your listeners, is we have mentors and we have tormentors. And I most certainly had my share of tormentors. But let me back up there to your question because it's important. When I started in my police department, there were no women in rank. Zero, not even at the sergeant's rank. And so if you would have looked at me when I got sworn in and said, you are going to become the chief of this organization, I would have laughed pretty loud in your face. And I say that because you don't know what you don't know, right? It never
Absolutely.
occurred to me that that was possible, that promoting through the ranks would be possible for me, because it just wasn't on display in my department. And so it was never a dream. It was never a goal. It was never an ambition. And it wasn't until a couple females got promoted to sergeant before me. But this is a true testament to the mentors that I've had. And they've been all male, that have said, that cliche is when someone taps you on the shoulder, and tells you that they see something in you that you genuinely do not see in yourself. And that's what happened to me. Is a lieutenant said, you've got some leadership skills on display, and I think you should take the sergeant's test. And I did the whole, are you serious? Are you talking to me?
Yeah.
And so I credit a lot of my career. I credit every step, in furtherance and ascension in my department to someone who looked at me and said, you should do that. But to your point, to your question, I should say, did I have tormentors? The absolute answer is yes. I mean, I had a commander look at me as a sergeant and say, he thought, this is great. He thought my style with my squad, I had 8 cops in my squad that I supervised, and he thought that I was too, quote, empowering. And so
What? You're too empowering?
This is what we're dealing with, though. This was a guy that, he rewarded the punishers. He rewarded those who disciplined. And you know exactly what kind of people I'm talking about. Is like, keeps people down, had a regime of people. And he looked at me and said, you will never become a lieutenant in this police department. And it was genuinely because of some of the evals I'd written on my guys, where I said, you guys are doing a great job. And of course, added room for improvement. But
Absolutely.
He said, yeah, he said, yeah, it's, too positive is the words he used. And so little antidotes like that. I will say I was pretty blessed in my police department. I come from a progressive police department that has been led before me by men that were, really open to putting the best person in the job. And so I have a lot more positive stories about people that helped me. And it's just a small handful of people that tried to keep me down.
Absolutely. And I cannot believe that. I mean, I've never heard that before, Kristen, where you're too empowering. Isn't that our job not only to help the public, obviously, but to empower the next generation of people that are going to take my job, right? To empower them, to build them up instead of disparaging them and say, oh, you're too, I've never heard of that.
Yeah, no, totally agree. And that was kind of his shtick, though. I mean, truly, that was his reputation, was the Punisher, and my philosophy was always, listen, I'm going to tell you what skills that you bring to the table.
You balance it out.
Exactly. That benefit the organization, right?
Yeah, you did. I always took the sandwich approach. Okay, you start off by, some positives, and you say you're doing this great, but this is what you need to improve on, and you end up with some positive.
Yeah. And that middle part is so genuinely necessary, because criticism, which we often, have that negative connotation, right, is when it comes from a sincere place of caring and wanting someone to get better. It's such a gift. And so that's what I looked at it. And I was all about the empowerment and giving power away, where he was more of, one, borrowing power from his position, and then, keeping others down based on that power structure. So just very different philosophies.
Because it says you were secure in yourself, obviously, I think. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Kristen, but you had that good confidence. And I think when people treat people like, this is just my opinion, they're insecure. They're projecting their insecurities out on somebody else, because somebody within his career probably did the same thing to him. So now he's got to give it back. You know what I mean?
I have spent so much time trying to contemplate what makes people act and lead the way they do. And you hit it right on the head. It comes down to esteem, how you feel about yourself. And it really does play into that phrase of hurt people. And there is something deficient in someone who tries to keep other people down. And that was a hard lesson for me to learn. And once I learned that, I had a complete paradigm shift, where I was, instead of disgusted, I was kind of amused. It was like, okay, this is textbook,
Yeah. And I think part of the things that make a good leader, and I have a feeling you're exactly like this, or you wouldn't be in, or not exactly, but you have this, or you wouldn't have been in the role you're in, is the humility. All right. I mean,
Yeah.
you got to stay humble. I mean, I'm not saying you don't want to know, say you're wrong all the time, because you don't want to project that either, but you have to be humble. You have to say, look, I'm willing to be open to other, points of view. I used to tell people, I don't want to be the smartest guy in the room. First of all, I'm not, but I want to get ideas from everybody else.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, I think
Yeah.
that's big.
But think about how many bosses you've worked for, though, that don't share that philosophy, where, they have to be the smartest person in the room, where they truly do borrow power. And I always make this, correlation of sometimes when people get promoted in our profession, they think that their collar brass equates to their IQ. The higher you get, you move up, the higher your IQ moves up. And as we all know, that is absolutely not the case. But, and you think about that, all of the bosses that you've loved working for share a lot of the same qualities, that humility enough to say, hey guys, I don't know the answer here. Help me figure it out. Right. And to me, there's nothing weak about that, but it seems like low hanging fruit, but there are so many leaders out there that are just, they operate, in the opposite sense.
Well, I thank you so much for your service and very difficult environment. I'm going to ask you two things. What was the hardest aspect of being the chief of police? And what was the not so hard or easy thing about being the chief of police?
Well, I think the hardest part is, every time you move up into a position, regardless whether it's law enforcement, but in this case, we're talking about, rank, is that you always look to that next level, and you either think, okay, we're ready, or but we're never quite ready. And there was always, when I was a sergeant, when I was a lieutenant, when I was a commander, there was always that thing where I was not the final decision maker, right? And so there was some leeway.
Yeah, I don't know.
With middle management, and by the way, that's a bad leadership trait.
Exactly.
I said it right. But there was, there wasn't as a heavy responsibility sitting on the shoulders.
There was a buffer.
Right?
There was a buffer.
Yeah, and then you get into that chair, and I remember I attended a 3-week course at Harvard, and there was this professor there, Marty Linsky, and he was walking around the class pacing, and he looked at all of us, and he said this: leadership is about disappointing people at the rate they can absorb. And I remember sitting in that classroom, this was before I became chief, and I remember thinking, this guy is out of his GD mind. Leadership is about inspiration. It's about being a visionary. It's about taking people where they should go, where they ought to go, but might not know that, that that's where they want to go, blah, 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 and so I rejected that notion. And then I got in the big chair, and then I made my first decision that pissed some people off. And I was like, I get it. I absolutely get it.
Yeah.
And so there is a point there where that to me is the hardest, is that falls upon your shoulders, and people are going to be upset at you. I could make a decision and 49% were unhappy about it, and 51% were like, oh, great decision. Right. And there's no one to point to. It's you. And at the end of the day, you get all the input, but you're making the decision based on promotions, on discipline, on policy. And it's like, man, that's a heavy load to carry. And so it was the hardest thing, but what brought me peace when I finally figured it out is that I asked myself 3 things. Am I doing the right thing for the right reasons at the right time? And the right thing, by the way, let me place an asterisk there. The right thing for the organization,
exactly.
Not for me, not for my friends, but am I doing the right thing for the organization? And if I could answer yes to every single one of those questions, I got comfortable with people being disappointed, right? And so that was the hardest thing.
Yeah.
The best thing, the easiest thing was watching cops at their best, right? I mean, we made it a goal of ours in our department to really launch community engagement to another level. And that's all I did. I said, you guys, I'm not going to count it. I'm not going to do this BS where you have to count widgets and how many positive contacts.
Exactly.
Just go out there and build relationships in times of peace. When nobody's calling 911, have conversations, get out of your car. And these officers turned that goal on its head, so much so that I was getting Facebook inbox messages, Twitters. I would walk in the grocery store and people would be like, one of your cops literally stopped me when I was taking my garbage out, handed me a business card and just said, "Hey, how's everything going?" And I'm like, this is it. This is the stuff. So when cops are at their very best, that just has always been, they make my job so much easier.
Absolutely. And you said it at the beginning, Kristen, empowering cops to do that. Not micromanaging them. And there's a time for that, but to a degree, but empowering your troops to go out there and make an impact.
Yeah.
Give them the power.
Yeah. Yeah, we give them an awesome amount of responsibility, right? And so, and using that autonomy instead of, looking at the screen. And this is where that culture starts in an organization and it comes from the chief down is what's your priority? Do you need those, 911 calls response as fast as possible? Yes, for priority one calls, but there's a few things that can wait. I'd rather an officer stay on the scene and problem solve, before going to the next call.
Absolutely.
And so, it's just giving them the autonomy. And when you do that, when you unleash the talent and the skill of those officers, they're going to go out there and do a magnificent job. And it's fun to watch.
And I always told people, I said, don't just be a call taker. Just bounce back. I mean, go to your calls, respond to your calls. That's your job, but also investigate, listen to people.
Yeah.
All right. Just don't be the person that's running from call to call to call to call to call.
And think about what you just said. How many times do we hear about cops and the quote, mirrored sunglasses and attitude, lack of empathy, lack of compassion, and what we fail to remember is what it feels like to be a victim of a crime.
Sure.
When this is our 12th burglary report of the day that we're taking, we forget that each one of those people have been violated in some way and how that feels as a crime victim. But for us, it's just move on to the next one. Pause. Let's just, listen to people as they tell you that this is, a difficult circumstance for them. And don't forget what that feels like. Just bring some humanity to your job.
Absolutely. And it used to crack me up when people, I was never the chief, obviously, but I was, a commander. You were the chief, and you had a tremendously difficult job because you're always going to piss somebody off. You know that, Kristen. You're never going to make everybody happy. If you're trying to be people's friends all the time, you're not going to be successful. Hopefully you can have that friendship. You know what I mean? But if you're trying to make everybody happy, that's not the job of the chief of police.
No,
you have that, you have that 50, 30, whatever 1,000-foot view. You have to look out for everybody, not just internally, but externally.
And I would say not even just the chief, but any leader.
Absolutely.
I mean, the whole argument, do you want to be loved or do you want to be feared? And so many people buy into the notion, that commander I was telling you about bought into the notion of fear. He just loved being feared, right? And fear buys your back, but it can't buy your heart. And what I mean by that is, I can make you do something because you're scared that you're going to get in trouble. If you violate policy, you're scared you're going to get disciplined, you're going to be held back, right? And that's so short term. So you'll do the thing, but you'll do it begrudgingly, and you'll also watch that leader, just walk right off a cliff, and you'll go, oh wow, that sucks, that's gonna hurt, without trying to catch them, right? And so feared is the wrong word, loved is the wrong word, because you just said is like you make decisions because you're afraid people are going to get mad at you. Well, then you have no business being a leader if you can't handle being upset. So the answer is you should be neither. You should be respected for the decisions that you make,
and they should trust you.
Yeah.
Because I think if leaders aren't trusted, that's a whole different, that's obviously bad. If they might not agree with your decision, but if they trust that you're doing it for the department and the community, then that's huge.
So that's the ticket right there. Trust is that just because someone's in a leadership position does not make them trustworthy.
Absolutely.
But they have to earn it. And the way that you earn it is by truly looking at your people and saying, okay, this decision that I'm about to make, it may upset some of you, but I'm going to tell you exactly why I'm making this decision so you can hear it from my vantage point. And then that's where that checkbox come in. Am I doing the right thing for the right reasons at the right time? And I have found that most people say, you know what? While I don't agree with it, I don't like it, I respect it, and I know where it comes from because it's transparent. And most people are reasonable, but it's taking the time to truly articulate on the front end why you're making the decision, the why behind the do. Once people know the why behind the do, I find that most people are like, okay, that makes sense.
Well, and here's the thing, Chief, you know this. Sometimes, in my experience with dealing with different leaders that supervise me, or the rest of the department, was they make a decision, then they don't explain why.
Exactly.
And then it's like, well, like you said, though, I mean, look, it's not like you answer to me. I'm not saying that, but if you explain the why we're doing this.
Yeah.
You
can say all day, you can make policy decisions sitting at your, conference table, your beautiful cherry desk, and, stroke of the pen decisions. But if you're not explaining it, and that's where I failed in the beginning of my tenure, where I was like, okay, I want to change this, 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 and this. And so I started doing it without articulating the why, and people were very confused. And so then I found, when I took the time, which, by the way, it takes time to, it's easier just to go, hey, here's the policy change, do it because I said so, jump how high, right? But when you take the time on the front end to explain the reason for the decision you are making, then that's when people buy into it versus, when they, become resistant to it. But you got to take the time.
Absolutely. Well, before we get into your book, Reimagining Blue, which I want to talk about, which I haven't read it, but I hear it's an amazing book, getting rave reviews. What's your take, Kristen, on the current state of law enforcement? I mean, what law enforcement officers, brave men and women everywhere, are going through at this time right now in the country, where there seems to be, and I should have prefaced by saying, I do believe that the majority of people out there support our first responders, but they are under tremendous pressure. We've always been, we know that, but they were suffering out there. Mental health issues, addiction issues, suicide rates. You read this every day and you're like, my God, when is it going to stop?
Yeah. And it was high. Our suicide rate was high before, and it's even higher now. I'll just give you my perspective, and I can offer it to you from my own city, right? I had a mass shooting in my city in 2019. 5 of my officers were shot and 5 civilians were killed in a workplace shooting. So that happened in 2019. And then in 2020, and by the way, those officers all survived, and they responded heroically. They got shot one by one trying to take down the shooter, and none of them relented. They all just kept charging forward towards that shooter. And so they all survived. But then as we were healing from those physical wounds, and not even close to healing from the emotional ones, which is still ongoing, then a pandemic hit. Maybe you've heard of it. And so
I thought I heard of it. Yeah.
So now I'm trying to figure out how to lead a police department in the middle of a pandemic that we know nothing about. This was in the early stages where is this going to kill everyone? I'm sending my police officers on the street, and we don't know what's going to happen because 911 calls don't stop. Yeah. And then once we started to kind of, get the momentum, get a little more information, then an incident happened in a little city called Minneapolis, Minnesota. Yeah. And so my cops went from hero, charging, a gunman, getting shot in the process, hero, to absolute zero based on something that they didn't do. And so the level of frustration, and I remember that I had a couple resignations after that said, you know what, I can handle a lot of things. But this has been my tipping point. And then we see this divisiveness and all of this vitriol being
absolutely
just pointed towards cops who've done nothing wrong. Now, that is not to suggest that those cops who are the ones who are making headlines, absolutely, you stand with people when they are right, and you part with them when they are wrong. And I have no use, and that's what I talk about in my book. I call balls and strikes. I have no use for that thin blue line of you can do no wrong, that blind loyalty, right? So present day, I'm glad to say that, at least from my travels from around the nation, is that the pendulum is shifting. Now suddenly, it was the silent majority that you speak of, the majority that was being quiet because it was so unpopular to say, wait a minute, I actually like my police department in my city. They've done nothing wrong, but it was just so uncool to say that, because if you didn't hate cops, then it's like you couldn't want cops to be better. You couldn't want both. Like, we should be able to say, wow, our cops should absolutely look towards reform where needed, but we still support our police and the ones that are doing good work every single day that you don't hear about. So that was the hardest time that I have ever had in my career, was watching all of the hatred towards our police officers and the pain that they went through, especially going, what did we do wrong? Right? It wasn't us. But like I said, I think that we now are where the pendulum is shifting. And I think that that you'll start to see the numbers of recruitment go up, because I think people are kind of
I hope so,
to mainstream, right? So at least I hope.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, because you talk to many people all around the country, and I got to tell you, the people I talk to who are still on the job, I would say 90% of them are looking for an exit ramp.
Absolutely. Countdown. They're on the countdown.
Yeah, they're on the countdown, which, okay, I get it. You served and, you're ready to retire or get out. But I believe that, Chris, and I hope and pray that it's coming back around, because, I mean, I think, and I tell people, when I was a young cop, we've always been under scrutiny, and we should be. But we didn't have social media. We didn't have all these things that were going on in the world where politicians were just openly attacking, verbally attacking officers. And I just hope and pray it gets better in the future.
Yeah, I've never seen anything like it. And of course, I guess I probably am old enough to say, back in my day, but
well, me too.
In my 30-year career, I've never experienced anything like what we experienced, after the murder of George Floyd. And then you talked about the mental health of officers, as, you have that weighing on them, right? Is that, they're trying to do their job, and yet, everywhere they turn, they're met, with such resistance. And, now we are talking about emboldening, criminals that are, wreaking havoc on our communities and taking away, that empowerment of officers to do anything. And so not only is crime going up, but then, officers' mental health and wellness. And, you're talking to a person who, had 5 officers shot, and many of our officers after that incident started going to therapy because of what they went through. And it wasn't just the officers who were involved in the gunfire. It was those who made it to the scene 3 minutes late and felt that they let down their comrades, right? It's
Absolutely.
Like everybody has their own, journey. So whether it's a major incident or just what I call the 1,000 tiny cuts every day that a police officer goes through, that mental health and wellness becomes the utmost important, because it's the whole cliche of the oxygen mask coming down. You've got to take care of yourself first, or else you are going to be useless for the community and your family.
Yeah, and absolutely. Gone are the days of Serpico, where everybody's corrupt. No police officer. Are there bad cops? Of course they are. But the overwhelming majority of men and women who serve are good people. Nobody gets dressed in the morning, Chief, this, kisses their spouse or whoever goodbye, and goes off and says, I'm going to shoot somebody today. I'm going to put everything on the line. I'm going to face possible prosecution, internal affairs investigation, civil, criminal recourse. No, who does that? Come on.
Right. So, it doesn't happen.
Some of the people that spew this narrative is utterly ridiculous.
It is, and it's so difficult to try to change their mind. Otherwise, I tried with data. I mean, that was one of the things I did as chief, when all the protesters, and I was trying to, to spew data of,
data? What's that?
Exactly. And so it doesn't work, because it's emotion, I
get my data from TikTok.
Exactly.
Instagram.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk.
I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful. I was just going to say, I'm hopeful for our noble profession. I think there's a lot of great people. I just left 2 universities, 2 separate speaking engagements. And
there you go.
And I said, how many of you in this audience want to be cops? And boom, I mean, major hands raised, the majority. And I was like, see, that tells me everything I need to know about those individuals who are going to come in to our profession, even knowing that we're, on, the precipice of, all of the things that have happened, but perhaps on the precipice of something better,
Yeah. Absolutely. And that's why leaders like you, great leaders like you, are out there. And a lot of it's just educating people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's not what happens on TV shows and the movies. That's not cop work. This is what actually happens. And that's why it's incumbent upon leaders like you to go out there and say, hey, this is my story. This is why we're great. This is why the profession is great.
It is.
So
And that's why we have to get better at marketing ourselves as well.
absolutely.
And that's why taking, our media into our own hands and by putting out our own stories. So that's become but cops and police departments have become better at that as well.
So let's talk about Reimagining Blue, thoughts on life, leadership, and a new way forward in policing. Tell us about the book without giving it away.
I sat down to write this book actually several years ago. I started writing it in 2018. Pretty funny. I was actually giving a talk on leadership to my community, to the Chamber of Commerce. And so I get done with my talk, and this guy, raises his hand. Yes, sir. I said, he said, I don't have a question. I have a comment. You should write a book. And I just looked at him sideways. Right. And, writing though was not, it was something that I've done for a long time. I wrote for my local newspaper as a young sergeant. And so I kept a blog for a while. So writing has been my therapy, but it never actually occurred to me that I would have any wisdom to write a book. Until he said that, it's that whole thing of, when someone sees something in you, right? Yeah, I know. And so then I was like, and then I just couldn't get that out of my mind. It's like, he just kind of like planted this little seed, and I was
Absolutely.
like, man. So then I was like, all right, maybe I'll just kind of, take the culmination of all my blog posts and just see what that, and the book is a very different book, I have to tell you, than what I sat down to write. And here's why. I've been putting it together. And so then I retired. I retired 1 year ago in September, and I needed to finish it. I had found a publisher, and I just needed to kind of polish it up. But I wanted to leave, as I told you, mass shooting, pandemic,
Sure.
Civil unrest, retire. I wanted to spend a couple months just being quiet and reflecting back on a 30-year career. And in doing that, I sat down to finish the book. And then I said, it's not working. I scrapped most of it. And then I rewrote the entire book because I wasn't being honest about my own struggles. And I was playing it safe. It was just so vanilla. Right. And so I decided to talk about that same father that we talked about at the onset of this, was also a father that battled demons of substance abuse, who later ended up, committing suicide.
Oh, geez.
And so I decided to get real about that and how that affected me and how I behaved as a leader because of it, and and a police officer, and my failures in leadership, because there's so many of the things I did wrong and the things I've learned what not to do from those I've worked for. And so the book is, if you asked me who it's for, my publisher tried to push me into the corner. Who is this book for? I said, I do not know. I am a
Everybody
woman.
probably.
Yeah, it is. And so what's been really cool is I have a great publisher, Amplify Publishing, and what they said was, you know what, then just write the book. And so now that it's out, I've obviously had feedback, and here's who it's for. Whoever reads it and gets something from it. So I'm getting people who don't like the police, because, as I said, I call balls and strikes in this book, and I call out the racial disparity and, some of the things that the problematic parts of law enforcement and society in general. And so that's what I mean, is that I sat down and scrapped the book and started writing about things. I wrote about Second Amendment. I wrote about race relations. I wrote about the murder of George Floyd and, and Sandra Bland. And I really tried to delve into some of these very difficult issues. And what I'm hearing is that people who don't like the police are like, okay, you know what? I kind of get it. I got a little insight. And I didn't know how cops would respond to it. And I've had a lot of chiefs buy them for their police department. So that's pretty
awesome.
cool. And people who are not even in law enforcement, because if you think about the leadership lessons that we've learned, as a commander, as a chief, any leadership position, they transcend the profession. These are leadership principles and attributes. And so, like I said, some of them are what I've learned by watching what not to do. Some of them I've learned by failing, and others just by figuring it out. So people have also said, yeah, I've got a lot from it, and I'm not even in policing. So that's pretty cool.
Well, that's amazing. That anybody, you're going to get some, it's not just law enforcement specific. Actually, that's your background, obviously. But I really like, and I can't wait to read it, I really like the authenticity that sounds like you bring to the book, meaning sharing. Look, people, I think, Kristen, want somebody that they can relate to. Yeah, you were the chief of police, but sharing stories and sharing tragedy and trauma, that connects with people.
Yeah.
That connects with people. And it takes a leader, somebody very strong as yourself, to come forward and say, I'm going to put it on paper. But I've learned throughout my life that when you tell your story and you're authentic about it, people connect with that.
I didn't learn that lesson until later, though.
Well, I didn't either.
Yeah.
I was one of those cops, yes sir, no, I mean, RoboCop, whatever, until, we all go through struggles, that, until you go through your own struggles, you're going to say, okay, I get it. Or I might not get it, but I'm learning.
Yeah.
And when you start sharing your stories, people start saying, oh, Pat actually went through some shit.
Yeah.
He's not what he's not all, he's got his shit together. Are you kidding? I don't have my shit together.
Yeah.
I struggled too.
Not any of us do. Not any of us do. And then we walk around pretending like we do.
We put on masks.
And I did the same thing. And I probably had a worse affliction that I imposed upon myself, because I'm thinking, okay, I'm the first female lieutenant in this department, first female commander.
Sure.
So now I have to act that way so people don't think I'm soft, right? So all self-imposed, by the way. It was just what I did to myself. And then you add that on, having a father that was very like, no feelings. There's no crying in police work. And I literally believed that. And I've since changed my position, but I tried never to let anyone see my vulnerable side. And it actually wasn't until my dad killed himself, which was right before I became chief, that I started to really reflect on his life and his philosophy. And I thought, okay, in my profession, we call that a clue. That machismo shit does not work. And so now you've got to take the mask off. And that's when I started becoming the V word, God forbid, the V word, where I was like, okay, we got to bring some vulnerability to our leadership. And that gives other people permission to do the same. And then when that happens, then they get the help that they need. And that's exactly what we want, right? People courageous enough to say, hey, this one's a little bigger than me.
Yeah. And vulnerability is a strength in most cases, in my opinion. It's not a weakness.
Agree.
Especially as a leader. And where can people find this amazing book of yours, Kristen?
There's this website called Amazon.com, and man, it has everything. You can buy toothpaste and my book.
I got to tell you, I love the cover of the book, and it'll be linked up in the show notes, and links to everything in case you want to go pick it up. I'm going to pick it up, but the cover is amazing. I love the cover.
Thanks.
Did you come up with that, or publisher, or what?
I did not. It was definitely my marketing team, and
that's pretty badass.
Well, because I described to them, I'm like, this is my journey as a police officer, but it's not all of who I am, right? And it's sort of this symbolic half uniform, half suit, which symbolizes I'm leaving my profession and going into a world where, I'm not wearing a uniform anymore. And so it's just that half and half of, one foot in both worlds. So that's the symbolism for me.
Love it. Can't wait to read it. Any final words, Kristen, before we take off? Any words to the listeners out there? I got one for you really quick. I know I said we're wrapping it up. I got one more question for you. What advice would you give somebody who's considering a career in law enforcement? And then your final thoughts.
Oh, yeah. People ask me all the time, would you even tell people to go into law enforcement?
Become a fireman.
Actually, that's in my next life, I'm totally going to be a fireman. No, but I would say, I would absolutely encourage people to go into it. And especially, especially if you are a problem solver and a kind of person, but here's what I would say is that, what you think about police officers, take a close look, at just the human side, get to know some police officers, go on a ride along, and really, really lean into the fact that, cops, we all wear the same uniform. We're paramilitary, but behind that uniform is our authenticity, and our strengths are what we bring to the table. And, the kind of police officers that I love, and especially when I got to, swear in new cops, the ones that had struggles, the ones that are the ones that had a tumultuous childhood, or the ones that grappled with some of their own demons, those are going to be the best kind of cops, because they understand the human condition, and so listen, I would just say anybody who is interested, learn, lean into the profession, talk to people who are in it, devise your own conclusion, but we need great needs people who are not just the mirrored sunglasses and attitude. We need great people who are willing to show empathy and compassion to the people they serve.
Absolutely. Kristen Ziman, retired chief of police, Aurora Police Department in Illinois. Thank you for being on the show, ma'am. You're amazing. Everything we talk.
Back at you.
Yeah, well, I try. It's your world. I'm just a squirrel trying to get in that. That's what I tell people. Yeah, I everything we talked about will be up in the show notes. I'd love to have you back on in the future when you're
oh
done.
My God, say the word. No, this is great.
You're done with your world tour. But I
good.
appreciate it, Chief. And I hope you have a good day.
You. Pleasure meeting you, and thanks. Back at you. Talk to you soon.